to that point, there is a tactical incentive. So you know all of this. There is a tactical incentive to not drawing that type of opposition. That if you can fly under the radar, you actually have a better chance.
Yeah.
Now, if you've done it, right, they go back, they find the tweets, well, hey, stand your ground. But there's something really to be said for example, on the positive side of things. Here in Texas, we have the Dunn brothers, big time oil billionaires. They have been politically active. They put money into people's campaigns. They fund conservative causes, all this, that, or the other. It's better to, it's kind of called sometimes like hide your power levels. It's better sometimes to hold back a little bit and get $150,000 in support from the Dunns and win your race than to run, to be all up front, to attract tons of attention, make donors like that wouldn't like all of your views. I'm not really going to support that guy. Seems like a bit of a loose cannon. It's better sometimes because you got to be thinking long term. Well, I stood on my principles and I lost. Yeah, but how much better would it have been if you won?
Yeah, right.
Like there's, we lost it, but I was out there and I was principled. Yeah, but you fell short by just a couple hundred votes, and you could have probably made that. Not even if you changed your views. So I'm not talking about compromising. I'm not talking about you're sitting there in the interview and it's like, well, do you believe in abortion? And you're just like, well, I got to win this race. And yes, I do. You know, on demand, anytime, anywhere. Of course not. But practically speaking, like just really practically, there's not a lot of reform theonomists out there bankrolling theonomists going into politics. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of conservatives with billions of dollars bankrolling conservative candidates. Mm-hmm. Those exist. Anything to add on that?
No, that's wise. Politicians have it on good authority that politicians sometimes lie.
Believe it or not.
Believe it or not. And that gets into a broader topic of, but it is actually, it is a theological category. A lot of guys, plenty of debate. I'm not saying it's settled and just, black and white, but there is actually a debate to be had, like, did Rahab sin in terms of, all of a sudden the guards in Jericho are knocking on her door,
Right.
Have you seen the Israeli spies?
Yeah.
Do you know where they are? And she's like, oh, they went that way, and meanwhile they're hidden in her living space. Or the Midianite, the Egyptian midwives. The Egyptian midwives, who say, oh, well, the Hebrew women, they're strong women and they just end up giving birth before we get there, But it's because they feared God. And so they defied and were willing to be intentionally deceitful towards Pharaoh, So there actually is a biblical principle for, they call it, Sproul actually did, I think, a whole sermon on this, the lie of necessity. The lie of necessity. And in this particular case, there are degrees of deception. So there's outright, blatant lying, but then there's also simply not divulging, not volunteering certain details of the truth. So there's a difference in being sat down on national television and being asked, when do you believe, human life begins? And just outright lying versus you just playing certain cards close to the chest during the campaigning season so that you can get the buku bucks from the nominally conservative, donors and win your race. And then once you've won and established that victory, then come out swinging, hiding your power level. So there really is something to be said for this, like even in the art of war, even within, the ramifications of just war theory, so it's like, it is a just war. So are we lying in a category that would actually be categorically sin by having, our platoons dressed in camouflage? I mean, what is camouflage other than an entire uniform that says, I'm not here? It's like, but you are here.
Right.
And you're communicating, you're conveying by your apparel that you're not somewhere when you are, right? Which is a lie. But again, so thinking through those things theologically, carefully, and strategically, and finding a way ethically, right? There are certain barriers where it's like, all right, well, you can't do that. That really is just categorically a sin. But there is a way of being, innocent as doves and as shrewd as vipers. And Christians do need to develop, I think, a godly sense of shrewdness. I think that sadly there are many times that we are innocent as doves and also as shrewd as doves, and that's a failure.
Yeah. There was a conservative candidate. So city council races are typically not partisan. So if I go to vote for city council, it's not going to say Republican or Democrat because those are local. Those aren't involved at the state level. But there was a city council member here in Georgetown, and he was really pretty conservative. But when it came to winning the district, he's like, if I go door to door and I try to get this small like group of a couple thousand people to vote for me or this, that, or the other, and I lead off with these issues, they're ultimately at the end of the day, like a lot of them will be turned off. They won't be motivated to come out. But he said, here's what I can do. I can make my campaign about preservation of historic Georgetown. We have a beautiful town square with lots of historic buildings. And so he's conservative and he agrees with all the things that we talked about. But he said, you know what? I don't have to lead off with those. They're still true. I still hold them to your point. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go door to door and I'm going to knock on doors. I'm going to say, hey, I'm really interested in keeping Georgetown, keeping its historic structure, keeping all the things that make it the town that we love. Perfectly permissible for a Christian to do.
Yeah, you get to decide what you're going to emphasize. That's different. Being strategic on what you emphasize and what you choose strategically not to emphasize is not the same as categorically lying.
Exactly. And if you're in upstate New York, you want to win an election, probably don't lead off with Christ as king. Is he king? Yes. And here's the deal. Once you get in office...
But why in upstate New York, Wes?
Why particularly?
Why not leading with Christ as king in that particular area? No.
I just believe it or not.